Welcome to this too. I'm your host, Timothy. Thank you for joining me today. For those of you that do listen, I do apologize for the delay. It's been a bit of a rough few weeks for me personally, so it's been difficult, but I needed to do this, and I just want to say thank you, especially to one specific person that messaged me on Sunday, just to kind of congratulate me and keep me going in terms of the positive feedback that I got about the show. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you so much for your message. Before we go in to today's episode, I want to just say, as always, just the usual disclaimer that I am not a mental health professional in any way, shape, or form, nor am I claiming to be one. I'm simply a person who has struggled and is continuing to deal with his own mental health battles and journey. And I'm just hoping that this can create a space where you can hear something that may help you, but also where you can perhaps identify and find things that'll help. So please, again, I'm not a mental health professional. If you do have any concerns or see or pick up any behaviors that you want to explore, please make sure that you contact your doctor, and then from there seek a psychiatrist or seek a counselor. I will provide, as always, in the show notes, contact details for support lines that you can contact that are toll-free. And with that being said, let's dive into today's episode. And what I wanted to speak about today is challenging for me, because I don't like using the term disorder, because that implies that there is something that is wrong with you per se. With borderline, as I understand it, there are physical imbalances. Certain parts of the brain are perhaps underdeveloped. And then also more often it's a combination of the physiological as well as the psychological. So the environment that you were raised in. So there may have been traumatic events. There may have been a series of events of invalidation, events that impacted on you growing up. So it's a mixture of psychological and physiological factors, both of which the individual has no control over. So that makes it sometimes hard for me personally to deal with a lot of the stereotypes that you see, especially online, focused on people with BPD. And we'll get into that a bit later. But I really just wanted to talk about it first and talk about its roots, what it is and how it affects you. And then also just add my own experiences of having borderline. I was diagnosed last year when I went into a psychiatric hospital. And I also just want to add with that, if anything is mentioned that you feel you identify with, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are somebody with borderline. It forms part of the type B personalities, if I'm not mistaken. And borderline basically means that it overlaps with a lot of other personality types. With my experience at the psychiatric hospital, everybody that I encountered seemed to be told that they were diagnosed as having borderline. So it can be commonly misdiagnosed as well, from what I see and experience with people that I know and from what I've read online as well. So I would advise, if anyone does identify with anything, please make sure that you seek professional help before you take any steps. We'll talk about things that you can do to deal with it as well, how to cope. As much as it is something that impacts your life, it impacts your relationships, it also is something that is manageable. And we'll look at the ways and means that you can manage borderline personality. So let's dive in. And borderline affects roughly 1 to 6% of all adults, and at higher rates in clinical settings. There's a lot of misdiagnosis with borderline personality. It is definitely a serious condition, but it is also treatable. BPD has one of the groups with the highest instances for suicide as well, and attempted suicide. So self-harm is definitely one of the negative impacts of borderline. So it is imperative that you do the work to deal and to cope with it. It's a mental condition characterized by pervasive patterns of instability in emotions, image, personal relationships, impulsivity. It causes significant distress or impairment. So in order to be diagnosed, someone typically needs to show 5 of 9 key criteria. One of them would be frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, and that is something that I've experienced. Unstable and intense relationships that alternate between idealization and devaluation, or commonly known as splitting, that also I can identify with. Unstable self-image, sense of self, definitely. Spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, etc. Binge eating, impulsive behavior. That comes to the fore. Some of that I can identify with too. Recurrent suicidal behavior or gestures, threats of self-harm, intense, rapidly shifting moods lasting hours to days, inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling your temper. And that is something that I have struggled with, especially when you suppress because of the fear of abandonment. So you tolerate and you do things and you overcompensate, and that leads to resentment. And I've been there and I felt that, and I struggled with that. There's also paranoia, paranoid ideation or severe dissociation. And when I have to say it in the present tense because I think I'm still dealing with depression at the moment. When I hit really low moments during depression, then dissociation is definitely part of that. So let's talk about some of these criteria. And again, I will speak to it from my perspective and what my experience was. And the abandonment, when my marriage fell apart, when I was discarded, and I don't have any other way to put it, it really felt like it was the end of the world for me. I remember how low I felt. I remember how I wanted to die and I tried to kill myself because my entire identity was wrapped up in this life that I had built, my family. I'm a father and I'm a husband, and I put my all into that. And I gave everything. And whenever the relationship hit a low point, I dug even deeper. And that inability to see the red flags for what they were. Instead, I just thought if I worked harder, if I kept trying, if I keep showing up, and if I do, then because I'm doing the right things are going to change. And it's because I couldn't face not being those things. And it's odd because I've never wanted to be a father. I never wanted to be a husband because I knew that there were certain things about me that would make relationships difficult. I saw a lot of my father's behavior within myself. And so I didn't want to be like that, be that type of father to my child or be like that to my spouse. And, behaviors, especially when you enter a relationship, it's weird how you fall into certain traits and copy from what you've seen, even though in your head, it's the opposite of what you perhaps should be doing. It's what you know. And I tried really hard to address the things that I did wrong, and I tried really hard to change. And I know that I was far from perfect, but when things bottomed out, I really lost myself. And I had to check into a psychiatric hospital because I know that if I didn't do that, then there was no doubt in my mind that I would have definitely killed myself if I didn't get the help that I needed in that moment. And in that time at hospital, the anger that I felt, that came out even afterwards. Once I started seeing things for what they were, instead of trying to hold on to desperately save marriage. Once I started seeing the actions for what they were, mine and hers, the anger that I felt was at times almost impossible for me to suppress. I remember the amount of times that I felt suicidal, how low I felt, how I had to reach out to support lines, how little support I felt I had, and how hard I had to work in order to try and keep my head above water psychologically, because I was really circling the drain. Borderline certainly affects your relationships and does make it unstable for various reasons. One of the ways that it does that is your emotions are heightened, your reactions are heightened. If you are upset, it's more intense, but it works conversely on the opposite end as well. The joy, the intensity of the emotions that you feel on a positive side are just as intense. And maybe that is what makes the abandonment or the fear of abandonment so intensely scary, because it feels so good. Because as someone with borderline, you often feel numb. You often feel empty. And I'm not talking about the existential type. There's just this grayness to how you feel. And when there are things that move you, when there are things that make you feel joy, it really takes you somewhere different. Your self-image can really be affected. Sometimes you'll veer from feeling unstoppable to feeling as low as anything. And again, I've been there and I've felt that. And those moments are also amplified as you try and recover from like emotional or any kind of trauma as while you go through those stages. And everything just seems to be so much more heightened through those experiences and compounded by borderline. The shifting of moods, definitely. But I think also for me, that ties in with overthinking. So you get stuck on ideas, you get stuck on things that have happened, and you fixate and you are so focused on those things. And why didn't it work? Why was the outcome X when it should have been Y? And because you want those, again, tying back to perhaps the abandonment, you want those things to be because you've committed. You expect the outcome that you're supposed to get according to what you read in the books and what the experts tell you. And when that doesn't happen and you're still standing there staring at the abyss, really does take you to a really dark place. And it's been over a year since my attempt. It's been over a year since I woke up in that hospital bed. I had to force myself to face what was happening. It hasn't gotten easier. And in a lot of ways, things have just gotten so much worse. You're faced with this reality, and you have this added weight that you are now carrying because of what you did. That shame and the hurt that comes with that attempted suicide. It's not something that people want to talk about or obviously feel comfortable dealing with. And I've tried to own what happened because it is part of who I am now. And I have to accept that. And I also have to accept that people with borderline have a very high instance of suicide and attempted suicide. And people with major depressive disorder, which I also have been diagnosed with, also have a very high instance of attempted suicides. So I need to be realistic with myself about what could happen to me if I don't do the work. And it's always easy, and I know a lot of people use it as trying to be a motivating factor to think about your family, think about your daughter, if you were to try and kill yourself. But in all honesty, in those moments when you're so low, you don't feel like you are of any use to anyone. And your head, your mind has such a twisted and distorted view of yourself that you don't even feel like you're good in any way for your own child, no matter how much you love them. You don't feel like they are deserving of having you in their life. And that's a really difficult thing to face. Yeah, it's really tough to face. You can obviously tell it's difficult to even talk about right now. But one thing that I want to stress when it comes to BPD, and like I said at the start, it's not a flaw and it's not a weakness, and it's something that involves emotional regulation and the difficulties that come with that. But it's rooted in deficiencies in the brain. It not always needs to be a major trauma. It just needs to be something that includes perhaps emotional invalidation, where growing up you don't feel validated or safe. You don't get the emotional acknowledgement or needs that you had met as a child growing up. It's also been described as having third-degree emotional burns and less skin to protect you. And that I can agree with, because when things, especially when it comes to the lower end of the emotional spectrum, pain, heartache, sadness, it becomes consuming, like drowning. And it's been especially difficult having to face the reality of what I have to deal with, having given everything, spiraling as wanted to take me to a very dark place. And I've intentionally ignored calling at times. I've reached a point now where I'm trying to work towards something positive again, because things have felt pretty bleak for a long time. But you make it to it one day and then the next, and then things don't feel as bad, but it still feels pretty bad for me. And it's harder to deal with those difficult moments. It's harder to deal with the emotional blows. It's harder to deal with grief. These things, when everything feels so raw and exposed and intense. And if I look at my situation, if I look at everything that I've had to deal with, I don't really know who I can speak to in terms of like somebody that can relate. If I look at everything that I've been through in my life that is kind of affecting me now without it being a therapist, and that makes you not want to talk to people. It makes you not want to open up. So you retreat, and those thoughts just run around in your head. They unfortunately run around unchecked, and that's when things get distorted and things become ugly in your mind, and you don't because you don't have a sounding board, you don't have anything to counter that, and so you believe those voices. All you see is the negativity, and all you do is replay things that you had hoped would have different outcomes, or you replay things and you see it differently, and it's like you're going through those emotions again, and you just keep going through this cycle of emotions, and it's exhausting. And as a guy having borderline, I've always been sensitive and quiet and introspective, and that heady and dangerous mix for somebody with intense feelings, because the intensity of the feelings will inspire and impact how you think, and that impacts how you feel. And then because you don't talk, you keep it inside, and so these things just go and amplify. And I didn't really understand a lot of the things that I felt when I was younger. Now that in hindsight, having been diagnosed with borderline, there's a lot of things in terms of the behavior that I see now. When my first love died, I was 19, and I remember how I drank a lot. I suppose I would be classified as a social alcoholic. I didn't drink during the day, during work or anything like that, but when I went out with my friends, we drank, and it was like the point of it wasn't just to enjoy yourself, but the point was to get drunk. And we would have some drinks on a Monday, on a Tuesday maybe, if we saw each other. And then Friday night you go out, Saturday night you go out, Sunday you have beers and recover. So it was like a constant thing. And I didn't realize in the midst of it, I didn't realize the extent of it. But I do now. When I do have a drink, I immediately get that feeling and that little voice that says, have another one. And that's immediately the sign for me to know that this isn't healthy for me. I shouldn't, because you shouldn't want to have that feeling. You shouldn't want to be thinking about the next. You should be able to savor and enjoy what you have in front of you. So I don't drink anymore, and I'm really glad and happy about that decision that I made. Yeah, other things that will affect you going up would be attachment issues, sensitivity to rejection, and unpredictable childhood environments, which seem to be particularly linked to BPD. So especially if there is, I suppose, an aggressive parent or someone that has a temper, you may become a people pleaser and anticipate needs growing up. From what I've seen within myself, I think that there's an element of that to my own behavior, or there has been. And, it's almost as if you're standing with a gun in your hand if you have BPD. If you use this, I know it's a violent image, but there's the bullet in the chamber, and the environment that you go up in pulls the trigger, none of which you are in control of in terms of the influence, but you are in control of yourself once you become aware of it. That's where your responsibility lies. I've seen people describe it as living an emotional roller coaster with no brakes. Emotions sweep over you like tidal waves, and I can speak to that. The intensity, the heady joy of falling in love and loving someone and caring for someone. And I remember last year when things came crashing down, how I would have panic attacks talking about what was happening to my spouse. Dissociation is just this numbness and this retreating into, like, sitting in a room with windows closed and the doors closed, curtains are drawn, and you just sit in the dark. That's how it feels. And it's like you're sitting there waiting for someone else to come and turn on the lights and let the fresh air in, because you don't have it in you. All you want to do is just be closed off. There's this numbness, this, I don't know, it's like emotional bubble wrap that keeps the world out, but it's not actually protection. It's just avoidance. It's not obviously healthy. It's not good for you, but it's how you've learned to cope, and how you try and keep your head up and face things if it feels like your world is crashing down around you. But again, disassociation is not something that is specific to someone with borderline. And I think one of the reasons why borderline gets the negative stigma is because other personalities or negative personality types include narcissism. And I think sometimes people think that people with borderline are narcissistic, or that they are intentionally manipulative. And I don't think that the manipulation is out of desperation to use someone. I don't know, but I can only speak for myself. So it's about perhaps that desperation to avoid abandonment. And so you do whatever it takes. But it's not like using someone the way a narcissist would, where it's about malevolence and it's about feeding your ego and that fragile ego that needs soothing. And it makes relationships difficult at times. I think it made, and again, I can only speak for what my experiences were and what my spouse had said. And it's not easy to say these things. And I can certainly understand and recognize what she's in terms of certain aspects of things. And I have to own my behavior and I have to own my actions when I got mad. And I definitely worked on reducing and bringing my emotions in check to the point where there wasn't any outrage, there wasn't any shouting and banging of doors. At first, when things would reach a head and we'd have an argument, I would leave. I would walk and just go for a walk and cool. But when you have a child or you're married, you can't just leave. You've got to kind of stay in, or sometimes you're not allowed to leave. And so, or you just suppress and accept things that you shouldn't, and then that pisses you off even more. So when you get upset, then all these things come out. And again, that was for me. That was what was happening on my side. A marriage is never just a straightforward thing. And it takes two people to make it work. And it takes two people to play their part in order for it to be a healthy relationship. And I know that I did everything that I could. And I tried my utmost to make sure that I did everything that I could to ensure that it worked. And when it didn't, that really caused me to bottom out. But again, I'm not going to try and sit here and paint myself as a saint and purely as a victim. Splitting is basically where you have that person on a pedestal, and then the next moment they're the absolutely worst thing in the world. And I have felt that, and I've done it, and it's not something that I'm still particularly proud of admitting, but yeah, I can acknowledge to doing it. So splitting, impacts you. The other people say they feel confused. They don't know what it's like. They have to walk on eggshells. And I was told that. I know I should have handled things better and dealt with things in a much better way. And I have to own my behavior, my actions. There are lots of misconceptions also about people with borderline. Like I said, that they are manipulative. It's often desperation and not premeditated calculation. Also, that borderline is untreatable. It is most definitely treatable. It just needs consistent work. You need to put in the work that needs to happen. People with borderline, not everyone that you date with borderline is going to be like the character from, what was that movie, Fatal Attraction. They're not going to boil your pits. Like with everything, and like with it all things, there are gradients and levels of it. As if you have somebody that is able to do the work, and if you are somebody who is present and wants to actually deal with things, because we all have our own burdens to carry, we all have our own issues. It's not something that should affect to that extent. I know how what happened with me impacted me and how that was exacerbated by borderline. But I know that also at the same time, I know exactly what happened, and I'm honest with myself about that as well. And a lot of times people with borderline will say that they need compassion and not judgment, because it's hard to understand from someone else who doesn't feel things the way that you do. To put yourself into the shoes of somebody who feels things more intensely than you do. It's just alien for someone else to do that. So there are coping strategies. Most commonly, dialectical behavioral therapy. So there are books that you can use. There are things like the Dear Man technique, TIP technique, which is temperature intense exercise, paced breathing, and progressive relaxation. So there are skills that you can do, and it requires a lot of mindfulness, and requires you to be present and to be aware of your emotions and to not just allow yourself to be swept up in them. There's also mentalization-based therapy, transferred focus, psychotherapy, and schema therapy. There are also medications for co-occurring issues like depression and anxiety, but not for borderline personality itself. Other coping skills are mindfulness, like your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. So that means you will sit and think about like 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 that you can smell, 1 thing that you can taste. And it's just about grounding your mind in a different space, getting it out of the emotional stress that you are experiencing at that time. Self-soothing, so listening to music, perhaps going to walk in nature, doing things that are the opposite of the urge that you have, and then radical acceptance, which is something that is at times really difficult for me to deal with or to do. And that's acknowledging the reality to reduce your suffering. But exercise helps, and that's something I can definitely account for. There's support groups, you can journal, you can do things on your own as well. And the most important thing is to remember that you are not alone, that you have help. And you can call for support lines, you can call Lifeline, you can call SADAG as well, of toll-free support lines. And like I said, I listed it in the show notes. Borderline is confusing when you have it. And because it overlaps, like I said, it is often misdiagnosed, but it's not a hopeless situation. It's not something that you don't have hope in. It's really up to you, but it is a situation that you can work out of, but you need to put the work in. And again, it's easy to say these things. It's not always easy to do. And I am testament to that, because I am struggling, but I'm committed to making it through to the other side. But it's not a straightforward path. With the work, we will get to the other side. So for now, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for listening. I know this was a bit of a long episode. Just remember, to all of those, anyone that is going through something, whether good or bad, or whatever it is, this too will pass. Thank you so much.